Hello, hello, everyone. Today is October 27th. This is the bi-weekly meeting of the SIG Architecture Enhancements subproject. This is a meeting that will be recorded and available later on the internet, so please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, and in general, just be awesome people. So we've got a few things on the agenda, and I see that Lori, you put the first one on.
I think I put them all on. I was just putting a lot of items. So what I'm doing is I'm carrying over things that aren't done from past meetings to the current meeting, just track things that we've talked about and things we said we would do. So there's part of that. And then there's also just wrapping up some of the questions that we put in Slack and then don't get to because everybody's super busy. So I just put them here. And then I make an agenda for the meeting. So if you look at the receipts process check-in, for example, these points were in the Slack channel and I moved them here because these were the core questions that carry over from last time. And then we had talked about updating features and enhancements repo documentation. We had these questions from last time. There wasn't any note that we resolved them, so I've brought them over to today. There's also this action item, just putting it here too. It also need template for when you're requesting enhancements to enhancements process. I think that is actually part of this item above, right? Because we're talking about templates. Then capturing and iterating on KEP's template feedback. I don't think we have any discussion here. This is mainly to do for you, Stephen.
Gotcha.
And then these are two to-dos for Jeremy. They're quite small. I'm wondering if the time would be better served since Jeremy is doing other things, if somebody else could take them over. They're just really small typo fixes.
Yeah, I would say that's fine.
So I wonder if anyone here is willing to do that.
Just a PR for typo fix?
Yeah, basically two of them. The second one might be a little more intensive, I can't remember, just because it has the word inconsistency, which signals complexity. But the first one for sure is just fix a typo.
I'm happy to jump on those.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Yay.
So I can assign it to you or you can assign yourself and we'll pull Jeremy off of it.
Oh yeah, it's such a, the first one is such a tiny fix that I had to like look through to figure out what the fix was. It's super small.
Yeah.
Is there an issue or something? What do you mean assign?
It's the link. So it's I'll share the screen. I can't share the screen.
That's
you
fine.
Can't.
No.
I've got it. I can assign myself.
Okay.
I can make you co-host, Lori.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's the other issue is also linked to there. And you can take a look and decide.
Do you have, by the way, the host key?
I don't think so. So we can.
You should probably have that.
Offline.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So.
Looking at the second one, I don't have enough context to answer that question off the top of my head. So I guess I can do some investigation.
Yeah, so the answer is blurb. The answer is the first step that you should be doing is creating an enhancement tracking issue, right? The number of the enhancement tracking issue is going to tell you what that 4ends is, right? For the KEP. So that is to say that the second set of directions is correct.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. The second set of directions is correct.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the tricky thing when you evolve the process and then like the canonical doc is referencing the old process.
Okay, I added that as a comment and I'll fix the doc.
Yeah. Thank you.
This actually Yeah, this gets tricky, maybe.
Maybe you
'Cause
can
it's like
pair
if-
with someone though.
Yeah, it's like if we fix that part of the doc, do we fix all of it? Right, because like if we look at the kept metadata in this doc, right, there are new metadata fields, right? So the kind of the reason that we opened 617 was to go through improvements that we wanted to make to the kept, or like the kept template, which is also, well, the kept template was created separately from the kept 00001. So basically going back to the original KEP and saying, do we want to update this, or do we want to, I think what we initially decided to do was just call it implemented and move on. We might want to go back and update it. So I think it's fine to also work on the inconsistent instructions for the file name, but a larger task for the group would be to go back and update KEP 0001.
Okay, so there's a new action item.
Yeah. Sorry.
Maybe James might have some bandwidth we could ask, because he's clearly might be able to pair up with the Craig some, because he's filed the issue, so he might.
So for this issue, it's a small baby one, which is totally fine to grab. I would say that one of the sub-project owners should work on updating the KEP.
Okay.
The big, yeah. And after this issue gets resolved.
John, do you think you have any bandwidth to do that?
No. What was the question? I'm sorry. I was multitasking.
It's okay. It's okay. Updating the template.
So
Craig.
not the template. Not the template.
Oh.
It's not updating the template. It's actually updating the first KEP.
Oh, okay.
Right. Because the first KEP.
0001. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'll probably won't happen till.
And it's fine. It's kind of fine to slow roll this one because people should be using the template anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'll try and do it by the end of this week, but I won't be able to get to it until maybe Friday.
That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
That was earlier than I thought you were gonna.
Yeah.
No, that's aspirational.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's fine too. Like early next week. It's cool. All right. But that's not a prerequisite for Craig to do the other part, is it?
He should actually do that first.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
So then create the enhancements tracking issue, and then all right.
And put the I would drag this out as its own AI. Yeah.
Ah, okay. All right then. So looks like we covered that.
Yeah.
Then, then I was going to move to this item to spend time on receipts, maybe last.
Okay.
Just updating the features and enhancements repo documentation.
So
these were the questions from last time.
Yeah, this was the work that we had decided would be good to shard to interested PXMs.
Yes. So I guess I did reach out to them. Aiden has been out of the office a bit.
I know he dropped some PRs though.
He did.
Yeah.
So I will just ping them both again.
Cool.
And I think we're done with that for now.
Sweet.
Although, wait, one question, the glossary, will they won't know where it is. Who might know where it is?
The glossary should be on the README.
README.
Yeah. Okay, so then this question, we don't need anymore. That was a question raised last time. It's in the README. Hey, we have a lot of read fees, you know. Sometimes they just take so long.
No, I'm
I think I
laughing
saw
at the.
some. Yeah, I think I saw something else in the meeting notes right now.
Yeah, and I was
Is the
laughing
note
at
taken?
Craig note taking, and he was like, actually, Lori.
I can't keep up with Larry.
Oh yeah, I have a real fast typer.
Just keep going. It's all good.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Because I'm also like organizing my brain while I do it, but
I get it.
I'm a really terrible note-taking teammate because I just end up doing it. This is one of my personal faults. Here, take notes.
So far,
no,
I see no flaws.
No, not like that.
You won't take notes because I won't allow you. All right. So I guess that's resolved then. So then it just leaves receipts process, check-in.
Yay, oh no.
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So a question before we get into the meatier stuff is just maybe easy. Can we confirm that we want the SIG submitting the PR, sharing the receipts in a YAML file in K enhancements? We did some pros and cons last time. We thought that enhancements would have more pros, but there was a little bit of an open door. Can we close that door and say yes, K enhancements?
Yeah, I think so.
Do we have a note to that discussion? I don't, maybe I thought I was here last time, but I don't remember. It was between K release and K enhancements. Is that the discussion?
K SIG
yes.
release. Yeah.
Yes. Release. Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. And so I guess the issue would be who has the authority to merge, or do we just put owner's file with the release team, or how are we?
So there is there is a release directory already. The releases directory, and then each release has a scoped owner's file, which includes the enhancements lead, right?
Here we go.
So we could just add another one that included the relevant people.
But that's not in K enhancements. That's in K.
That's in K SIG release, right? So the idea here instead would, the alternative is a releases directory, exactly like what we have in K SIG release, with just enhancement owners in it.
Here are the context notes from last time. I've pulled them up. If you want to give them a look again. And also Craig, he wasn't here. You can try to follow along.
Sorry, my Halloween decorations. My son walked by and he's like really annoyed because we put this little Medusa head right there on the piano, and it's like right in the hallway. Everybody walks by and it makes, all right. So
I should actually click in.
Why is it easier to have a K? I guess I don't. If it depends on whose point of view you take, right? From the point of view of making the KEPS website, maybe it's easier to have in K enhancements. But from the point of view of the entire rest of the project, it would be like, I guess that's where that's where the KEP is, I guess. So
Lori, Lori, this is actually related to the. So Lori and I just got off of the release engineering meeting, and this kind of dovetails, right? So they were talking. Yeah. So I was like, this is an information architecture exercise, really, because like so many of these things are SIG release related. Like when you're talking about release notes and the enhancements and a few other things, they should really all be on one website. And right now, people are essentially building websites in different places that are not the one true website. So having them, if we said that that release website was supposed to be just the SIG release repo, then it becomes really easy to just have the receipts also in the SIG release repo, right? If there's going to be an enhancements web, I think it's like who does the website first, right? Because like we want to do an enhancements one, right? We could say we could have two websites, right? Like if the enhancements one is aggregating everything that is kept metadata, then that's one website, right? And however you want to slice and dice that metadata can give you what's happening for the current release, right? And the release website could potentially contain what's in releases /120 / like metadata.yaml, right? Which is the aggregate of all of the receipts.
So I guess one question I would have is if you're doing that, then you have the risk. So we have to decide whether the metadata sitting in the kept.yaml, which gives targeted releases and information about releases for the enhancement, that piece of information should be removed or should be proposed or what, and it should be instead done through the receipts, because otherwise we're going to end up with people updating one and not the other. And I can tell you which one they're going to update the receipts because they have to, and they're not going to update the kept.yaml, and they're going to be out of sync, and there's going to be confusion.
So the +1 for keeping it in enhancements is also that if eventually we want the receipt to just be a snippet of the kept metadata, then it's a lot easier to do whatever information munging, whatever this kept.ctl tool maybe eventually does within one repo, right? Instead of checking out two, assuming that both are up to date on your local and yada, 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 right? So like,
yeah, I guess I'm just, like, maybe, go ahead.
Yeah, like ideally, you're not hand cobbling the receipt, right? Ideally, you're running something that says, give me these pieces of feedback from the kept metadata, right? So like that's the incentive. So like that's a future part, right? That that's a future task, but that's the incentive to keep the kept metadata up to date, right? So that the receipt is just a snip of that, and which gets dropped.
Well, when when we document that process, and maybe we already I know there is a document you and Lori put together, but I would have to go check the details.
It's this.
It's what we're looking at. Okay. So if the process is as a SIG, I go and update the kept metadata with my proposed release schedule. I have complete authority to merge that, and I should. I mean, there needs to be, because it's.
I mean, you should with SIG scoped, right?
And, exactly, and then at that point, release team, either automated or manually, runs a tool that takes all the kept.yaml metadata and populates the receipts, and then the release team decides in and out of those proposed items. Is that the idea?
So I guess there are a few ways that you can carve it up. Like the initial idea was that you provide this hand cobbled stub, right? That goes into a proposed folder, right? Like eventually we run some tool to essentially aggregate all of those stubs, put it into a metadata.yaml within the top level of that release, right? So that is one flow. What you suggested could eventually be possible, but we may not want to go down that route because it puts it on the release team to do that action, right? The action that the release team should be doing is the approval of what's accepted into a release, right? So basically taking the data that's in proposed and moving it into accepted.
Right. So I'm thinking about that's why I said hopefully automated, right? So it's about permissions on the directories, and I guess you would, I guess, or it's about how much work a CAP author has to do. Does a CAP author have to do a PR in enhancements and then a PR in release, SIG release? I guess, you know, in this process, they would do their enhancements, they would merge it, then they would create some receipt, either manually or through some tool, and then they would submit that, and then the proposed folder. We had this discussion before, and I wasn't like who merges into the proposed folder, and then release team moves it to. Like it would seem like a PR is a proposal, but that's a different.
Right. So the reason for the separate folders is basically a allowing us to put different pre-submit checks on those folders, right? So like the submitting into proposed would have weaker validation than something that lands and accepted, right? So so we kind of talked about like a proposed, accepted, and then something like an at-risk exception Z folder, right? So if we determine that your receipt does not have all the things it needs to have to actually go into a release, then it gets moved to at-risk instead of accepted.
Right. Got it.
And then you're on the hook. You're on the hook for providing that data. And if it stays in at-risk, then it stays in at-risk. If that data eventually gets fixed, then it gets moved to proposed, right? And that bit can be some tool, right?
Right, and the thing that would be interesting is right now that's done through like changing a value on a spreadsheet, and can we automate that toil away? And having them in a proposed folder. Okay, you're going to have a pre-submit check that says, you know, you have to meet these criteria, and then you can propose it. And then in order to get actually targeted to the release in an accepted state, you have a separate set of pre-submits that are going to check like, is it implementable status? Is it this? Is it that?
And the idea there would be the propose is kind of like loosey-goosey. You know you're going to do this for the release for sure. Maybe you haven't updated the CAP yet. I don't know, right? Maybe the CAP update is in flight, right? And maybe the accepted part is that I'm going to do a comparison of like this CAP. So maybe you propose the CAP that is in you know, is in an early phase, right? And it's not implementable yet, right? Maybe one of the checks that moving to accepted would do is look at the CAP metadata and say, is the status implementable, right? And then flag it, right? Your CAP isn't implementable, right? So that's usually a discussion that an enhancement subteam member has with a, you know, with a SIG, and you know that instead maybe becomes a report, right? The following things were you know, are planned for the release but are currently at risk for, you know, click in and see more details, right? So that's a potential route. I think it makes sense for the stuff that goes into accepted to be validated against the actual CAP metadata as opposed to what's in the receipt, right? So Craig, just to catch you up, because I know it's been a while since you've touched this specifically, and this is what you're hearing is wildly different from what we were doing when SIG PM was live. So the receipts process is basically, I think we had talked about some of this, but not the actual implementation details, is a process by which we would essentially, you know, first goal is to eliminate the enhancements tracking spreadsheet, right? So essentially the receipt is a commit to the work that you're going to do for the release, right? As opposed to the enhancement subteam going through all of the open enhancements, pinging people one by one, you know, slowly like pulling teeth and getting the data out of them and then updating the tracking spreadsheet and doing that back and forth throughout the release, right? Basically, you submit a receipt, and if your proposed receipt is in on time, then it is moved to maybe the accepted bucket, right? Assuming it has all the correct stuff, the validation that we're talking about right now. If it doesn't, it's in an at-risk bucket, and it gives you an opportunity to figure out what's at risk, why it's at risk, and how to bring it back into accepted. That, you know, eventually maybe becomes a report instead of a sheet, right? Weekly report or something that goes out and says like, hey, these are the ones that are in the release, right? So instead of having, you know, anyone from the enhancement subteam have to do this work, right? We start to put kind of automated levers around it. So we're just kind of talking through what those need to look like, what the first steps are.
It's just a state machine and the YAML and the associated with the KEP.
Yeah.
So I would still want to understand better what those pre-submits look like with respect to the different folders, because if we can have fewer folders, I think it's simpler. Like you could propose could just come out of kep.yaml, and then, you know, if it's in the kep.yaml. But if we see a real need, I'm not sure what that need is. As far as I see pre-submits for accepted, are there pre-submits for proposed, and what would they be such that we couldn't do it off of just the kep.yaml, changing the targeted release for a stage?
So I mean, really, it's giving us time, right? The proposed folder could eventually go away, but what this allows us to do is essentially like have a landing place for manual work.
Yeah, I'm concerned about like going to the community and then being like, oh, I have to submit a cap, and then I have to like just extra steps, extra PRs, and I'm worried about people getting annoyed with us. That's all.
I'm used to that. I'm used to that.
Yeah, I mean, this is
you know,
this is a boundary. Like this is I think a message, a signal for accountability. Like you just
understood.
You're informing, you know.
Yeah.
But what I'm asking is there a way to do it with fewer steps? Right? Can we achieve the result with fewer steps? That's all.
So here, why don't? Sorry, this is my suggestion: is that I don't think we're going to build the perfect system. I guess if we have too many steps right off the bat, that can turn people off right away from it. But that said, we still aren't going to build the perfect MVP or, you know, the first prototype.
Sure,
so I'm wondering, what are the, I guess this is a detail that we need to work out to not turn off SIGs. But
yeah, what I worry about is, adding the tool. What this would be like is having kepctl be able to do this, right? What I worry about is having a pre-submit against a tool that is not complete, and questioning, because I would question, like if I'm working on something that's not related to enhancements and I've wired it into a pre-submit, like my first question is like, is my tool broken, right? Versus the question for them should be, did I submit the correct information, right? Not whether or not the tool, they shouldn't have to care about the tool that's doing the pre-submit, right? So that's one of my worries, that we produce an ineffectual tool and turn on pre-submits for this accepted bucket, right? But I get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying. Ideally, it is 2 buckets, right? It's essentially like at risk and accepted.
Right.
And you know, and your proposal is your PR. You're absolutely right. Right. You know, you don't get to merge until you know, until that happens. And then, you know, the question becomes, is there a reason for an at-risk bucket?
Right. If it's not merged, it's at risk. It's not accepted.
Right. So maybe, I mean, you know, maybe that's it, right? Maybe like there does, you know, maybe there doesn't need to be a set of buckets at all, right? Maybe it's just the 120.
In or out.
Yeah. Right. You're in or out. Or it can be like, you know, receipts or releases /120/receipts, right? And you drop everything into that bucket. And if it you know, if it merges to the bucket, then it merges. Then it would had enough data
And
that
that's
it needed to merge.
accepted. So one other question then is, one of the things the release team does, or the release enhancements sub team does, is there's one is, this is all what we're talking about is sort of before enhancements freeze or just after with exceptions. Then there's the actual, throughout the rest of the release, there's like, hey, what PRs are associated with this? Are they merged? And keeping track of those individual PRs. I guess that's still for now manual. Is that how does that fit into this tooling or updated process?
Yeah, so that was kind of one of the ideas around having the accepted bucket, right? Where maybe one of the validations is whether or not you have a docs PR attached to your KEP for that milestone. But figuring out how we would encode that, right? Encode that into the KEP metadata, because like this is all stuff that should really be in the implementation history of the KEP. And if you've read multiple KEPs at this point, and you know that implementation history is never like really well structured, right?
Yeah.
Or done.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
So
well,
so
I'm thinking about like there's docs KEP. They're usually like they'll be later in the cycle, like after a lot of development's done. There's like, we need a docs placeholder PR, but that's different than accepted to be worked on at enhancements freeze time. That comes much later. And also, of course, writing the actual code comes later than enhancements freeze. And the enhancements team currently tracks all of that stuff too. And so if we're trying
to... So they track the ish, right? So, that's for the code part, it's kind of split between enhancements and kind of bug triage. Bug triage is less bug triage and more, issue triage, issue PR triage, right? For anything that's targeted for the release, right? And then from the docs perspective, that's the docs team. The docs team is usually the one doing the tracking.
They go in that and they put, but I mean, they use that spreadsheet too, right? There's actually a column in that spreadsheet.
Oh yeah,
associated with this feature, and then the enhancements team, as code freeze comes up, starts pinging people. Hey, code freeze is in a week.
You got your docs. You got your thing. You got your stuff.
Is this PR going to merge? Is this PR going to make it to actually implement the feature?
Yeah.
And
so I don't think we're going to get fully away from that, right?
Right.
I think our first goal is to decrease the amount of time that it takes for time and toil that it takes for people to get things done right at the beginning of the cycle. Right. If we can minimize the toil like between the beginning of the cycle and enhancements freeze, then we've done a lot of work there. And if we're saying that the rest of the cycle is manual interaction with people, I think that's probably fine for now.
Do we, in our PR template, do we ask right now what feature issue the PR is for? I mean, I know years ago, before I was even involved, there was like, if you're going to submit a PR, you need an issue associated with it, and people just created shit issues, and then, pardon my language, and then, like to just like cover their butts. So I don't want to necessarily push people towards that if it's a failed experiment in the past, but I'm trying to figure out that next step of how do we automate, or how do we distribute the work of associating these PRs with this feature, so we know when the feature is done.
So what we did as of a few days ago, maybe yesterday, I merged it or something. There were some updates to so that, like what you're describing is what the enhancement issue is supposed to be, right? Before anything happens, you create the enhancement issue, and the enhancement issue gives you the number that you use for the KEP, right? So what we added to the template was basically each of the phases or stages are now basically sub bullets, right? One is looking for your your KKPR, next is looking for your docs PR, and then making sure that you have an enhancements let me see.
Right. What I'm asking is if I'm working on some feature and I create a PR that implements, or I create 4 PRs that all together implement the feature, should I be putting in my description a link back to that feature issue? And if we did that, then I could have a tool that can say, oh, this feature needs these PRs to merge in order to be part of this release.
Yeah, I think that, so there's a section that people rarely use under release notes within the PR template. That's like, I forgot what the code fence is called, but it's essentially looking for additional links, right? What we could eventually do is, if those sections are being filled out, to scrape that and try to like do some mapping there. But that is, I think, orders of magnitude harder than what we're trying to do right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's also going to come down to, like, if you are working on some subsection of an enhancement and you're not really connected to the SIG and you're just churning out code, then you don't know to do this thing, right? Which means it's going to be disconnected. Yeah. So like, I don't think that we can solve for that without creating some additional friction and merging in KK.
Yeah, I know that, like, today, the only way those get discovered is by the enhancements team going on the feature issue and saying, hey, what PRs are there?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What PRs are associated with this? And it's sort of like, so things get missed now, and that may be fine. And right, this is longer term, right? And questionable whether we want to do it. I'm just trying to think through that process.
As an enhancement owner, right? You are essentially you're supposed to be the project manager for that enhancement, right? So you should be making it easy for everyone who is looking at that thing and taking the PRs that get merged and putting them in the implementation history. Like, that was literally the point of that section. But no one does it.
No one does that.
Yeah. Okay.
That means
I just want to know, we've moved a bit from the original question, which was the repo. No, it's fine, because we're adding meat on the bones of this concept, but I just want to see, like, ideally we'd like to get this out the door during the cycle. And so what would we need to have in hand to do that,
For the original question, let's just keep it in enhancements for now.
Okay.
That's the easiest. That's the easiest thing to do. If something in the workflow, like, perfect is the enemy of good, yada, yada, right? Like, if something in the workflow proves to us that this should be elsewhere, then we'll consider it at that point. But I think right now, keep it in enhancements, keep it under our control.
Okay. Fine. And then this is the reason why. And then, so confirmed this repo. So that question is resolved. And then there was the question of the folder structure. Would we like to simplify that, given that we are concerned about people looking at this and going like, oh, too much friction? So John's suggestion about having a simpler version, maybe 2 buckets or no buckets at all.
So I feel that so we talked about this a little bit. The PRR was another piece of this, right?
Yes, exactly. The PR is a signal, basically. It's its own bucket in itself, basically.
Right. So we don't necessarily, we want people to, like, I do want to make it easy for people to commit to say, to doing something, right? If the stage is off, right? Like, bringing something into accepted would basically, like, if the stage is off or it's being promoted, then it might require, or probably will require, a PRR review, right? Is that metadata filled out, right? That's the kind of thing that the additional validation would do going into that accepted bucket. So what I worry about is by having too few buckets is that we make it harder for people to do that initial commit of the enhancement.
Well, let's try it. We can always change it.
Why what about the 2 buckets? Because there was the at risk and accepted.
So the original was 3 buckets, right?
Right.
So so accepted, proposed, and at risk, or exceptions, or whatever we was.
Yeah.
At risk is probably the most accurate for that 3rd bucket.
Exactly.
The question would be, can people go straight to accepted? Like,
Yes,
can they just submit a PR and accept it without submitting a PR to proposed first?
Yes.
So
If
we
proposed
can,
is like,
yeah, we can do that workflow too. We can say, like, if you feel confident that you have all the things that you need in that KEP already, then submit directly to accepted. We could do that.
right.
Okay.
And then, but if you just want to signal this is what we're planning, and you're still working on pieces of it, put it in proposed.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I think that, yeah, I think that's acceptable compromise there.
Yeah,
So
because I'm thinking about people who right now they wait till like the day before freeze to like
get all the stuff and write all the things and
exactly, and they don't give it any attention until then. And so like if they have an extra step, it's kind of weird.
So
not that I want to encourage that, but I just realistically don't think we're going to get a lot of people who are like, way ahead of time proposing things. But we'll find out.
It's mostly sorry. It's mostly like there is an amount of work to be done, right? When you like to be done, right? To have officially proposed your thing, you have your KEP updated, you've done a PRR, all that good stuff. And that is harder to do than just saying, I'm going to commit to this thing. I plan to commit to this thing, right? So we do want to give people that route to be able to soft commit to something.
Got it.
And ahead of providing the rest of the work, right? Because if we can get people to say, like, if I'm able to say at the beginning of a cycle that there are going to be 54 enhancements, 54 planned enhancements, like just by way of the receipts, that's a win to us, right? We know it's going to drop later in the cycle, right? We know it's going to drop by at least a third later in the cycle, right? So yeah, just lowering that barrier to entry for people is important to me.
I can see that. It makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm still.
And if we give the option, then they can do it either way.
But I like that. Yeah, I like that to choose your own adventure kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're offering 2 options. It sounds right. We're keeping 3 buckets, but the proposed bucket isn't required because they can jump straight to the getting into the accepted bucket. Is that right?
Right.
Yes.
Assuming
okay. Okay, so that's one flow. And then another flow where they propose. This is the soft commit, then go to accepted.
Yeah.
On the right. Yeah.
So that's good. Then you address your preferences. And this is like an acceptance criteria to have a fairly reliable estimate of number of KEPs at the beginning of the cycle, knowing there will be drop off. Okay, so then I think this just triggers the question about the name of these buckets one more time. We actually had 4, I guess. We had a remove bucket, which was added last meeting, I think, kind of quietly.
Okay.
So we have proposed. That seems pretty, no change. We have accepted. That seems pretty concrete. We had at risk or exceptions, but you just said at risk, Stephen, sounds more to the point. It covers the gist.
Yeah.
So you might just want to keep that.
Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Stephen.
No, go for it. Go for it.
I would ask, when does something get moved to at risk? So that's the enhancements team going through and saying, this one, presumably it only can move from accepted to at risk, not from proposed to at risk. If we hit freeze and you're still in proposed, then you're done, unless you get an exception. So like, let's clarify a little bit.
Yeah, so the idea is that ultimately the enhancements team is going to handle running whatever tool to generate the full manifest of all of the receipts that are in the release, right? And those are going to be based on, they'll be grouped by, you know, what's accepted, what's at risk, what, you know, what have you. The idea is that the original idea was that only the enhancements team is writing to the accepted bucket, right? When they submit that PR, that's essentially the collation of all the receipts. If any receipt fails a check, right, then you plop it out and move it to at risk, right? So it's supposed to be happening it's supposed to be happening as the enhancement subteam is sweeping everything from proposed and moving it into accepted, right? If it fails a validation check, they immediately pull it out and put it at risk, right? And then they leave it to the SIG to resolve that risk.
I have one question there. Does this like exercise happen on a like periodic basis? Let's say a week or something like that?
Yeah, so I think the first part of it would be, we would figure out whatever time between the start of the cycle or pre-start of the cycle to enhancements freeze, right? And structure that as like, okay, well, we're going to do 1 sweep a week, or we're going to do 2 sweeps a week, right? If you miss the boat, you get moved into, but I would say that we don't do the final bit until code freeze hits, right? Yeah, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think first getting the tool running, we can then adapt the process to the tool.
So we will do it once right after the enhancement freeze plus the delta of the exceptions window, right? Basically move everything which either did not file an exception or just fell off the radar to removed, right?
So we probably want to do something soon-ish. Like if say we get 10 receipts submitted or something, right? To start, we probably want to try to sweep those as soon as we can, or essentially as these things are coming in, right? We're signing the enhancements. We're giving the enhancement sub team ownership powers over this release directory, right? And from there, because what you want, again, we're trying to drive down the toil here, and for me it would be, for me as some enhancement owner, it's going to be useful to hear that my enhancement is at risk for these reasons earlier rather than later, right? I don't want to hear that at enhancements freeze, that I have to go back and fix something that I thought was all set because I did the thing that you told me to do, right? So like as soon as I can hear about it's at risk for these reasons, then I'm in a better state, right? And then it's less chasing for the team after enhancements freeze to decide what belongs where. So all of that to say, we want to do this frequently. We want to run this tool frequently.
So I was like talking more on the like accepted or at risk to removed bucket migration. So how does the state transfer look like for those receipts? So we will probably do it like 2 times a cycle, right? Ideally or pragmatically.
It depends. I forgot that this removed bucket was going to exist at all. I think if you remain at risk past a certain point, you've been removed.
So if I can now, talking a little bit more about this process, like it seems like essentially we have a queue, and then we process the queue and we distribute things according to their state, and they might live in the queue still. Or maybe not. That makes me wonder if what I said previously, and we agreed to, but maybe it was a bad idea, is going straight to accepted doesn't necessarily make sense in that context. Like proposed, it sounds like if you go into proposed and you run this tool, you process that whole queue, and things either get filed into accepted or at risk. At risk means they don't meet the criteria. Accepted means they meet the criteria for the current point of the release, the current stage of the release. So at enhancements freeze, that's a certain set of criteria. At code freeze or whatever, or maybe a week prior to code freeze or 2 weeks prior to code freeze, that's a different set of criteria. Is that correct?
So yes, we can do that, but we can basically say, because that involves kind of building subcommands into whatever this tool is, right? Or maybe it's saying sweep and code freeze, sweep enhancements freeze kind of situation. I would like to be able to get the same output from the tool whenever I run it. So yeah, I don't know. I do like the option of giving people the opportunity to submit into accepted, but I do see what you're saying is that like it's a queue regardless, right? So if you're in the right place, if you're in the right place or the wrong place, you'll get processed either way and moved.
And you get put where you belong.
Exactly.
We'll sort you out.
So yeah, I like that. I like ensuring that it's always, and things are always getting moved to the right place, and in that sense, this can be, this is something that I see maybe running periodic, right, as a proud job, right, and then then it becomes really hands off, right? If we decide to wire this up in a way where a bot has a token to just write to the repo and call it a day, like that, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we would have to see like imagine you drop it in proposed, and then the bot runs, and if it meets all of the criteria, it gets moved to accepted. But with that, and we can talk about it, so we have to decide now. Like, is that a PR that then the release team says yes, I accept it, or is it purely automatic? I guess we'd learn over time whether.
We talked about this. We totally talked about this because we were writing tools for. We were writing tools to submit PRs automatically for other areas like the release notes, right? And then, so the idea would maybe be to do it the same way Test Infra does it, right? Where you submit a PR and basically Test Infra on call has to come in and say yes to that PR that updates all of the images and stuff, right? So like that's a way to do it, where instead of like, immediately writing to the repo, it stages a PR. Right, and that PR continues to get updated until someone from the enhancements team hits it and goes like, yeah, that looks sane, and it passes all the checks. So
okay, so in proposed, you would run a tool eventually that would do this. Is that?
Yeah.
I just want to make eventually run a tool with the bot and token that it would be ready to go to accepted. Right.
So the PR is gonna sort out whatever it's gonna sort out, right? Like if it ends up in at risk or accepted, then that's what happens, right? Depending on what data is in there.
To accepted or at risk. Okay. Yeah. So eventually, once this is automated.
Yeah.
Okay. We still have some major questions here, and we have just 2 minutes left. One of the major questions that I pulled out in the notes is that. I'll just put it here because it's closer. Having one big receipt poses potential for conflict when multiple editors are working simultaneously. Could be tricky if the enhancements team lacks Git experience to resolve conflicts.
So they should have Git experience. Only one person should be working on this at a time, and the bot solves a lot of the bot is not necessarily handling the, it can handle that manifest generation, because ultimately every time it runs again, it will, things will be in the right places. So this can eventually shift into just an approval process as opposed to manually running the tool and getting the large receipt.
Okay.
But that's like, again, that's a long-term thing, right?
So how do we solve the immediate need of where we would potentially have the conflicts? We have one person working on this at a time. How would we enforce that?
I mean, I would hope that the enhancement subteam could handle that.
They would just communicate.
Only have one person. Yeah, just tell people like only do this. Yeah.
Could be like a wrangler. One person is doing it at a week. person of the week in charge. So there you go. And then you had the bot can eventually handle the manifest generation. And then I think you said one other thing. I'm going to put this over here. Conflict. Oh, they need Git experience.
They should have Git experience.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to say
conflict mitigation.
They'll learn.
Yeah.
They don't have it, they'll learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stack Overflow is awesome.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like again, yeah. At this point, everyone who's on this call has been in and around the release team. It's a mentorship opportunity. So if you don't know Git, you should be reaching out to people.
Yeah, move this up. It might just be something we would emphasize more on the enhancements team if it's not already.
Within the handbook, yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's.
I've included Git experience as part of the handbook, but
yeah, okay. So that's the major question. The other thing, yeah, the only other thing that's outstanding is just real flashy, quickie, is that this document has been hanging around since June. It is kept CUDL, kept CTL, whatever information, but we have continued to slide a little bit into the receipts could also be kept CUDL, or maybe not, maybe that tool could do some of this. The boundary still is like a little ambiguous, and this document just hasn't been touched for a really long time, and there's a
welcome to open source.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
so I'm like wondering, my question was, what of this belongs at all in the receipts process communication? Because there's a lot of
yeah, so what we talked about with this tool, and I guess it's been hanging purposely-ish.
Yeah.
Because essentially what we said about this tool is like we want the process, like it's people process tools, right? We want the processes that we develop to govern what needs to go into this tool. And because we're still kind of like formulating this process, I think it's fine that this document may be getting a little stale. The moving forward on receipts would force us to maybe write more validation in the kept val library as required to work for the receipts process. And if that becomes the ultimate structure for the first iteration of kept CTL, then that's fine.
Okay, great. Because I mean, I don't care that this document is set aside. I'm wondering what of this document we can plug in, if anything, to the receipts process so that it just lives there. And in accordance with the process that we are now well on our way toward developing. It's just, there's a lot of commands in here. I don't know if any of this applies. If you want it to apply, I don't know.
I think we'll
figure. Don't know where that. Can you link this document?
It's in the yeah, it's in the agenda. I also slacked on it about it 2 weeks ago. So it's here. What if from this here, I'll just put the title kept notes.
Oh, okay.
But it's here, and then yeah.
I'm just thinking if the receipts command can be a subcommand of kepctl. Does it make sense?
Yeah, however we wanted to design it is fine. I think that, ultimately, like what we care about is the library that does this, and however we package it into a tool is fine. We already have parts of the library, right? So this is, oh, geez.
I'm sorry, guys, I really have to go.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm recording, so when I leave, it's gonna stop.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So we will carry this on in the channel then.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.